Once again, this is the Cult of Honesty. It's part of the New Covenant group, if not the best title for the New Covenant group in a sense. I have received, that is, we have received so many phone calls this week, so many emails, just investigating what the New Covenant group, that is the Cult of Honesty, etc., is about. And we have spent a lot of phone time this week just talking with various people from various disciplines. We're very, very thankful for that. So if you want to become a part of the Cult of Honesty or the New Covenant group, that is in becoming a part of our shows, maybe looking at getting involved in maybe hosting or whatever, I want you to give me a call, because the New Covenant group certainly is growing. We have a network and we have various programs on, and we have people like Greg Braves, who has a wonderful show called Inspiring Honesty, along with Bob Graves, also the unconventional pastor, I should say. Bob Graves, he has his own show, and Joey and Greg Bray also have Clash Course, which is an awesome show. My wife has a show called Reflections with Monica Livingston. We also have William Langle out of California. He also has a show, and also Alan Darley out of the UK. He has a show. And then we have Daryl. He has Daryl's Place, and he has a show on Sunday afternoon. And I could go on because Matthew and Joey, they have a show called T-Bog. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that actually means, but maybe they can do a representation of what most people think it means or whatever. But that's a subsequent show, and I'll let them do that whenever they would like to anyway. However, I would like to encourage as many as would like to simply to call in. The number is 850-572, because we want to talk with you and discuss how to move forward together, because this is about atheists and theists together, coming together, finding that we can have conversations, be respectful, be kind, and not impose the idea of trying to convert one another. And this has become very, very successful in many of our shows, and I think it's becoming something that will set the trend for the future. It's a place where we can actually be intellectually honest, and so I'm very, very proud of that. I don't want to hesitate the Google Hangout tonight. I could talk about several of the things that I got into conversations, that is the topics of conversations with you, because I think they were so meaningful. But let's go right to the Hangout tonight. I think the subject matter is, would the world be better off without religion today? If religion never existed, is personal faith a different matter? And so, Greg, I want you to take it away. Joey's not here, and I may chime in from time to time, but it's exciting to see all of you guys here tonight. And so hopefully we can have a passionate discussion about what these questions are.
Hi, I look forward to the conversation today, but I do have to tell you we've decided to change the topic, given that Joey's not going to be available for it. The topic is going to be ways in which Joey Livingston is inferior to Greg Bray, and how he can cope with knowing that will always be the case. Go.
That sounds wonderful.
No, actually today we did want to certainly to talk about would the world be better off without religion? Also, if religion had never existed. So that's two separate questions. Is the world better off, or would it be better off without religion today, if religion were to simply cease to exist? And then also, if we were to go back through time, and if religion never existed, and then ask sort of the same two questions with personal faith instead of religion, and replacing that. So I guess I'd like to open up by giving my position on that, in I guess a bit of an anthropological sense. I have to say that I do believe that the world would be a better place if religion had never existed and if it were to simply disappear today. However, it would be so different than what we have now because religion has shaped human development in such a profound way that I really have a hard time even making the statement that if it had never existed, I would even be able to fathom what the world would be like. So I am going to sort of take some reservations on the first part, but say resoundingly that if religion simply disappeared from the planet today, yes, I believe unequivocally the world would be a better place for it. And the final question, if personal faith is a different matter, I don't think so. I think that the reality is, and again, this is why Bob and I worked so hard on operational definitions on the previous couple shows of Inspiring Honesty for religion and faith, is because faith is such a broad or broadly used term, but I mean specifically the faith that is associated with religion and the sort of the conclusions about the supernatural that come from it are no different as far as the world would certainly be a better place without them. Anybody else can chime in?
Well, I don't know that we could know for sure if the world would be a better place without them. It would definitely something would have had to fill the void. There was always this, the different cultures, they all, they evolved through, different areas, different regions, and all that stuff. And so you had one group of people that believed in Odin and Thor. You had another group of people that believed in Yahweh. You had another group that believed in Baal and Ra. So there was always this unanswerable questions. The unanswerable questions of where we came from, what happened, how it all. So I mean, that's one of those things where I think it was just part of our evolutionary process. Where it was, that was how we filled voids before we had science. Before we were, and at least before we were able to get to where we are now with science, and now we can explain away a lot of the things that, we used to use God as the explanation for. So, would the world be better without it? I think it's safe to say the world would probably be better without it now, but especially when people like to beat everybody over the head with it all the time and tell them how to live their lives and who they can marry and things like that. But, as far as would it be better, if it had never happened, I don't know. Like I said, I think that's just part of how we grew. It's like, would you be better if you never crawled before you walked? So that's kind of the way I look at it. I think I jumped out of turn. I'm sorry, Greg.
No,
four guys ahead of me.
Not at all. we don't go by the order in which I don't even know how Google organizes us. Is it alphabetical? Looks like it. Yeah, JKNT. Yeah. So we don't go alphabetically in this respect. So, does anybody disagree or have a differing opinion from either myself or Nelson so far?
Yeah, I think that it would be. I do not think that it would be a better place without religion. So I guess I'm addressing the first question mostly, in the sense that I think that the goal of the whole experiment, the whole human life experiment, if you call it that, is diversity. And in culture, you want as much diversity as possible, and religion provides a wonderful branch of diversity. And I don't agree with a lot of it. I'll be the first to admit it. But I think that there have to be people that fight that fight. I think that it's necessary. I don't think on a metaphysical term that there needs to be a yin to every yang kind of necessary. I just think that in the same sense that I don't agree with, because I'm an atheist, I don't agree with the way that certain atheists go about doing what they do. But I think they're necessary. I don't agree that what theists have to say in general, but I certainly agree that they what they believe needs to exist in the intellectual commons, in the marketplace of ideas.
But I mean, hey, as a direct response to that one, you're saying that it brings diversity, but is all diversity of opinion good or beneficial to humanity? I hesitate to use the term good. It implies absolute or objective values. So that's why we did a series on is church harmful. It was specifically through nuanced definitions of church, but this is more about religion. I have to say that cultural diversity that religion brings to the table is certainly a real thing, but so is the cultural diversity that racism brings to the table. Can we say that the world would not be a better place without racism because it brings diversity to the table?
I would say that's apples and oranges, because racism is specifically it's so exclusive. Unless you were saying, hey, it's not so much that I'm excluding people, I'm just so proud of the inclusiveness that I have. You know what I mean? Unless you're willing to...
I guess let's say white supremacy, or specifically anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
If we can choose a specific iteration of racism, then it makes the question a little bit more poignant. It's also difficult when we're talking about religion in that respect to say, is it... would it be better without religion, because religion takes on so many and such diverse forms. But to say then, would the world be better without anti-Semitism?
Would the world be, I mean...
Well, you look at the extremes of anti-Semitism, that have existed throughout the course of time, with Hitler and all that other wonderful stuff. So, what I think, to your point though, Greg, and I think Chris alluded to this in a way, religion and faith, or whatever you want to call it, if it's adopted and if it's an embrace as a form of personal philosophy versus theocratic governmental mentalities, then I think it's okay. Certain people have got to have this element in their life. They have to have a Jesus. They have to have something, that they can hold on to, whether it's real or not, but they have to have that. And there's, my wife and I were talking about this week, where you're almost envious sometimes of people that really have that strong faith, because they can just throw their hands up and say, okay, I give it all to God, it'll be okay, we put our, you know what I mean? So I think if people have that and it really strengthens them and gives them comfort and joy, then by all means. But when they cross that line and want to start telling me how to live my life, or my neighbor how to live their life, that's when I think it becomes more harmful.
But can we separate the two? Is the latter not a direct result of religion as a general category? I mean, if we can get the former, we can get the latter, and I think that's been proven. So it's sort of like opening a doorway, and whatever happens to run through it is what does, when we say religion in general.
I think we're already starting to see that. I mean, in society, there's always the extremes. There's the morons like the Fred Phelps and the Pat Robertsons of the world that everybody rolls their eyes at now. But I think little by little, you posted that article about 2042 or whatever, that it would be gone. I think it's bombastic to think that it would go away completely. But narrowing it down to personal philosophy, I think it's very reasonable to think that that's where it could be 30 years from now.
So I guess when you look at it, you see sort of the personal faith side to be the part that is a different question then. Am I understanding that right?
I think so. I think it's a different question. Yeah.
I see it all wrapped up in dogma. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I mean,
and I mean it from, I guess, from more of a psychological question. Personal faith, dogma, religion. If religion is taken out of the equation, personal faith and dogma are still going to be in the equation. You know what I mean? Like that South Park episode that talks about what the world would be like without religion. If there was just an atheistic world, people would still war with each other, but over different interpretations of what atheism meant. You know what I mean? It would still.
Well,
be like,
it would probably be over who belongs, whose cave is this? Whose women are that?
I wanted to take a moment to say hi to Kim. It looked like your camera was working there for a moment. Are you able to join the conversation yet, or still getting things set up? You might still be muted. We muted your microphone because we could hear it moving. There's a little microphone icon sort of to the top right portion of the window. If you click that, we'll be able to hear you. Can you hear us, Kim? No? Okay, we'll move on. How about you, Daryl? Do you have anything any differing opinion or any statement you'd like to make? Are you frozen? You there?
I think he's
frozen.
I think he's
Yeah, you appear to
asleep.
be frozen.
Yeah, he's.
Well, come on now. Got
I'm
two
joking.
participants who are not participating at the moment. Get it together, kids. I wanted to make another statement to Nelson. I liked your crawling before we walk analogy. I thought that was a significant way to understand religion, but I will borrow a bit from the terminology, and this is the reason I asked you about it before the official show started today, Chris. I think that we are all limited by our phenomenology in that respect, because we have grown up in a world where religion is such a prominent part of our cultural history and our cultural social makeup that to separate it entirely or to end it abruptly would be quite possibly very detrimental to a lot of the individuals who are very wrapped up in it. In the same way that canceling Oprah would be a huge mind or earth-shattering event for a large portion of the country. That doesn't necessarily mean that in the long run it wouldn't be a good thing for us to do.
Well, the way that we have, let's see, how can I put this? The way that our scientific method has developed is based on religion, don't you think? Or either religious ideas or reactions against religious ideas.
I think the ethical part of science is probably where religion helped, not to the extreme, where we had Larry the Cable Guy, prior to this current president say stem cell research was bad. But I think that when you look at the general context of man not wanting to play God, that's where the ethics kind of kicked in, whether that makes sense or not. But I think that kind of gave it a little bit of a governor. Now people are starting to pull away from that and they get a little braver, where it's okay to make an ear in a petri dish if you can.
But I guess I was talking more about like the origins of the scientific method and reason and stuff, and the philosophy of it. I mean, wasn't that kind of steeped in theological thought and and then reactions against theological thought? And so it's so like to your point, Greg, it's so interwoven into what is now the way that we think, that it would almost be impossible to think of a different trajectory of if it went a different way. Like how do we not go from animism to polytheism to monotheism to philosophy to science to the scientific method with the naturalistic methodology to the way that we do science today? Like how does it not go that way?
I don't know.
And what would it look like?
The real question, I guess, is could we have ever gotten here without going through those steps?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I saw a thing that was posted on Facebook by a former professor of mine today that I appreciated. I've seen it before, but I'll read it off of his page here because I like doing that. It's the black cat analogy to sort of sum up a lot of the different activities that people do in our thought processes. It does sort of have a progression as well, if you think of it anthropologically and historically. But it says that philosophy is like being in a dark room and looking for a black cat. Metaphysics is like being in a dark room and looking for a black cat that isn't there. Theology is like being in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there and shouting, "I found it!" Science, on the other hand, is like being in a dark room and looking for a black cat using a flashlight. Still might not find it, but it's the best way we can go. And I guess the reason that I like that analogy is specifically theology has that "I found it" aspect, and that's the part that I think it really is the difference between religion and other philosophical endeavors. Is religion is creating answers where, or coming to conclusions where none can justifiably be drawn, and I think that historically that's limited us far more than it ever has aided us. It's satiated us and placated our curiosity, stopping us from moving forward and continuing this search. And the search, I think, is best, or that is the best way to describe philosophy, metaphysics, and science as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Well, it might seem a little tangential, but I have a certain pet theory that certain brands of theism are enmeshed in finding certainty. You know what I mean? Like these questions about absolute truth and absolute this and absolute certainty, and when it comes to knowledge and epistemology and stuff, and it really blows their mind and makes them uncomfortable to know that people really live in a world that is bound in partial knowledge and relative certainty, and and it just kills that. I think that that's the distinction that you're kind of talking about. Like, some people just need to know for sure, and some people
Well, they need
like,
to they need to
really,
feel like
really,
they know for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess that's more the thing. Yeah. They need to have the feeling of like, I know the answer. Oh, why does this happen? I know the answer to that. Why did that happen? Ask me, I know the answer. Whereas some people are just more comfortable with the I don't know thing. And that's why I posted on the page earlier in the week. The whole I don't know, feeling comfortable saying I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Man, because I almost forgot that that's a valid answer. Because sometimes I get wrapped up in having to answer a question that like maybe a creationist would ask.
Sometimes I don't know.
And I'm just like, sometimes I don't know is just like the best answer. And I get wrapped up in the fact that I have to give like the scientific answer and just like, hey, you know what? I don't know. But I guess that is a tangent from tonight's topic. But
I do think that it's necessarily. I think it follows logically as part of the conversation, or where it will lead to is, that aspect of religion. I don't know. When I look at it, you're right. There are people who need that security, and religion certainly does provide that security for them. But does that mean that it's healthy? I mean, there's people who also need heroin or feel that they need heroin,
Yeah.
or escapist
sure.
cocktails and chemical.
There's lots of escapist behaviors. And I also want to take back what I said. I was unfair. I said that there are theists that need certainty. There are atheists. There are humans. There is a contingent of humans that need certainty, regardless of theism or atheism. You know what I mean? Like I know atheists that are just like militant to the degree of being fundamentalists, where they're just like, no, man, I know that the exact reason why something came from nothing, and I know the exact reason why abiogenesis works, and you know what I mean? Instead of just throwing their hands up and being like,
yeah, it takes a great deal of humility, I think, to be able to just say, I don't know, and I'm okay with that.
yes.
It's
I think that's the comfortable part.
disquieting in many ways. It's even disquieting for the topic that we had last week about the afterlife, to say, I don't know. And that's one of the big questions that I think bothers a lot more people who are looking to religion than the questions of origin, because it's a little bit of a fun mental endeavor to look backwards and say, where did we come from? I mean, people wonder about that, But where did my mom go? Is a much more, or where did my baby go? Is a much more difficult thing for our minds to wrestle with and to cope with when there is no known answer to it. So I see that actually being the bigger primary driving force for, or motivating force for people wanting and needing religion. I understand, I've had devastating losses that I've gone through in my life that I honestly don't know if I had not been somewhat of a believer at the time I was 13 and my grandfather passed away, who was incredibly close to me, how I would have coped with it. I had a hard enough time coping with it, even thinking that I was going to see him again someday, that it was, I think would have been many-fold more difficult to handle without that. So I understand.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised that I didn't get more of a reaction from asking, don't you hope that there's an afterlife? People were very quick, the atheists were very quick to be like, nope, don't hope there's an afterlife, nope. Because when my wife asked me that question, I was just like, nah. I was like, no, I don't really hope, but she kept pressing me about it. She was like, you don't hope that there's something better? Or something else afterwards? And I was just like, no, not really, because eternity is a long time, but she made me think about it, and it made me think. Whereas, Brian and Kat, they were just like, nope, not at all.
Well, part of it is, I think it's difficult now that we exist to conceive a concept, to conceive not existing. You know what I mean? To where you're here. It doesn't matter that you came from a seed meeting an egg. How that part you got conceived, but now that you're here, if you pass away, what is it? Just dark? Is it just not? You know what I mean? So I think that I regret the fact that I wasn't able to attend last week. I know it's got nothing to do with this week. Well, I guess in a sense it does, because that to Greg's point, is probably the biggest driver to religion, an afterlife. That's the biggest product. If you believe this way, you're going to live a wonderful, happy life with angels, and if you're Muslim, virgins or whatever. And versus the alternative to I don't know.
That's something that just occurred to me. I'm sorry if I'm going to go on a tangent here, but the Muslim virgins in paradise. Is that like a perpetually refilling cycle? Do you always have 72 virgins?
Well, one would have to wonder.
Sort of a temporary state. Otherwise, is it that they're 72 virgins and will always be virgins?
Well, but then you'd have to wonder: how much of a paradise is it for the 72 virgins?
These are questions that just occurred to me now. It's like you get 72 virgins. And by virgins, we mean like the Hessian virgins of ancient Greece, that they are virgins and will be virgins. You're going to spend a lot of time around some nuns.
Jeez.
Enjoy that time. And they're going to be really good looking and really flirtatious too, just because this is what, Allah considers paradise.
Well, maybe they're virgins, but you can't touch them. Right. But that wouldn't really be paradise, so now would it?
Right, yeah. It's like, this sounds more like hell to me. Going on. This is what happens when there's no female presence.
Yeah.
I apologize, everybody.
There's no sense.
To bring us back on topic, we do have a viewer comment here from a Matt. I don't know if I should give his old username here, but from a Matt who says, religion can only argue from a deist point of view. That way they can make stuff up. Daryl, we still are getting just chop from you. I cannot follow what you're saying there. Sorry, we're not getting a good enough connection here.
Yeah, and I love hearing from Daryl too.
I know he's so soft-spoken and doesn't push his way into conversations that often, because we dominate because we're rude.
Egomaniacs.
I just thought it was because I was Italian.
Oh yeah, that's what I said, isn't it?
We're Italian, same thing.
It is pretty
It's like
much-
atheist and rational.
Exactly. Wait a second.
Everyone's irrational. What are you talking about?
I said rational, not irrational.
Nah, it's still chop chop.
Ah, man.
Okay, so I wanted to, I
But,
guess, Daryl, I'm sorry. Do you have a way you can plug your wire or your connection in? Are you hardwired or are you on Wi-Fi? Because if you can get it plugged in, you'll have a way more solid connection. If it is already, you need to like slap up your internet service provider or something. I'm sorry, Daryl. We cannot understand what you're saying. Maybe if you'd like, you could Skype in through the New Covenant group. I don't know if we can get that set up. Any producers want to chime in here?
That's going to cause a latency problem, so I think it's better to leave it with the Google.
All right. Well, Daryl, we can get your commentary through the chat if you use the little blue icon on the left. If you want to type in what you have to say, I know it's a little bit more cumbersome that way, but we would really love to get your viewpoint in this. I wanted to respond to what Matt had to say in the comments. It's saying that deism is the. Let me read it again. A religion can only argue from a deist point of view. That way they can make stuff up. I have to disagree. I think that they can make stuff up in whatever point of view they want to. And that's kind of their shtick. So I don't think that we can necessarily make the argument that they can only go from deist. That's why I think that personal faith is not exempt from this either, is because in the end, it's declaring you found the black cat in the dark when you found absolutely nothing. And as soon as you do that, you're leaving the door open to any sort of declarations out of ignorance. I think that that's, in the end, what the best way to describe what religious faith is I don't know, therefore I've come to this conclusion that I want to be true, or that I've been told is true.
Well, but then you also have the paradigm, the difference between deistic points of view and theistic points of view. Where deism being that somebody wound it up and walked away, and theism being somebody wound it up and is sitting here hanging around controlling everything. So I think the argument is, for in this particular context, the argument's one and the same, but I think people forget that that there is a difference between those two religious philosophies.
I have to agree that there's a qualitative difference and a quantitative difference, but as far as the faith-based aspect of either of them, I don't think that there's a difference in origin so much as degree.
Right.
I don't know. I feel like we may have exhausted this topic for the amount of contributors that we have today. This is last couple weeks we've had so many people that we can't get them all in. So we've gotten used to making our arguments concise. Should we move on to another topic?
Sure.
Why not?
We've got 20 minutes left in the show here. Let me pull
Unless
our
Dr. Joan wants
our
to.
cult of honesty. Yeah, Dr. Jones, you're still part of this conversation.
I had several curiosity questions when it comes to religion. How do you guys define religion would be one, and number two, when it comes to linguistic creativity, what makes us think that we could even stop that kind of creativity from evolving?
Anybody want to tackle that one? Either of those?
since I believe that religion is necessary, I would say that any definition of religion, I would use a very liberal definition of religion. So anything that anybody considers a religion, because I want there to be a diversity, I would consider a religion. As far as linguistic creativity, I would hope for it not being able to be contained in any way, shape, or form. So in other words, even if the religions were to disappear, I think little pockets and sects of dogma and people's creativity that could be seen as religions would start popping up places. I think that it's so ingrained in human nature to create stories about things that people don't know enough about, that it would just start recreating itself. Does that kind of answer the question?
I think it does to a certain extent, and maybe Greg can address mind science, that is, from a biological standpoint, when it comes to the creativity that happens within the mind itself in a linguistic context. Can you explain to us linguistic creativity and why it happens, that is, from the genome factor?
Unfortunately, that is one that I'm not that much of an expert on, and it's a pretty complicated question where it is. I do know that we have I'm getting a lot of feedback from somewhere. Is that me?
I don't know.
Is anybody else getting that, or?
No, I hear it.
Okay.
Don't know what's
It appears to have worked itself out now, so that's good.
I'd like to jump on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
To Dr. Jones's question as far as what religion is, I think, unfortunately, the best definition of religion, in my opinion, actually comes from the Bible, the book of James, chapter 1, verses 26 and 27 are actually the only place in the entire Bible where you hear the word religion mentioned. And I think that where it says, it's James 1:27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless as this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself being polluted by the world. So if that was what religion really was, then I think it would be difficult for anybody to even not want religion. But unfortunately, that's not what it is. It's the dogmas and the doctrines that come with the different types of religion that are that we have now. And if we could have embraced that one simplistic view of what religion was supposed to be, then I think we wouldn't be having this discussion, because nobody would not want religion.
Well, and I agree with that, and I'm actually going to differ from Chris on the question of or the definition of what religion. I think that giving too liberal of a definition means that literally, I think basically any opinion anybody's ever had has probably been considered a religion or a religious opinion by other people at some point. So leaving it too open, I mean, I've been told that atheism is another religion, science is just a religion, any ethical or philosophical or legal or really any code is a religion according to some people. And that's why Bob and I spent a good show and a half trying to narrow that down on Inspiring Honesty. And we came up with one, or I found one that we sort of adopted as a working definition until we can refine it. And that was a set of beliefs and or actions to regulate and approach reality expressed in doctrine, philosophy, myth, symbol, ethic, ritual, matter, experience, and social organization in some way related to spiritual qualities, phenomena, or entities, which is a very complex definition.
Well, this is one of those cases where the biblical definition is actually better.
But I don't think the biblical definition is very representative. That's the problem, is that it's one that would be great if that's what we were, but I think that religion is not, it doesn't really fit the common usage of that very well. And actually, even the definition that I just gave doesn't fit the common usage all that well. It's from an anthropologist who is trying to categorize it, come up with sort of an operational definition. Therefore, you can qualify: is this a religion? Does it fit this or not? And I think it's a bit too strict because it lists them all in sequence with an and does not have sort of
Or
well, I mean, if you look in medical texts and things, it'll have sort of like, is this pertussis? Well, does it have a paroxysmal cough? Does it have this? Does it have that? Then it probably is. Or if it meets 3 of these 5, then it's almost 100% certain that it is pertussis. So we kind of have to look at this in a diagnostic approach, because not every single thing that it can reasonably be considered a religion by the common definition is going to meet every single one of those criteria.
right.
But it'll fit enough of them that I think we sort of see an overall pattern.
Okay.
Daryl, I feel like a jerk for when I just have to keep saying that we can't understand you.
Okay.
That's a bummer too, because I like hearing from Daryl. I don't get to do these enough, but it seems like every time I'm on, it's a small sausage party every time I'm on for some reason. But
It says something about you. more
Hey,
than anything.
maybe I should
It's when
jump
you
on
say you're coming, huh? Just don't tell anybody.
everybody else, I think I'll do it stealth next time.
If you guys will excuse me for just a moment, I'm pretty sure that my toddler is trying to break his way in through the door into my studio here, so I'm going to go placate him for just a moment. I'm going to give you a topic. Art Deco is neither art nor deco. Discuss.
I don't know. You want to grab that one, Chris? I don't know even how to touch that.
Well, we'd have to go back to the Latin derivative of art and dec. No, I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Well,
So
Dr. Jones, how are you? How's the wife?
She's doing wonderful. I'm looking out in the audience, and she is gorgeous. Back to my earlier question about linguistic creativity that actually happens in the head. So many people have ideas, and these ideas are not coming externally. They are based upon genomes. And my question, I guess, has to do with how could we stop that which is in the mind from surfacing, and would it not be an act of repressing if we did so?
I had actually a response to that from when you sort of asked it earlier about. I can't give you the biological or the genetic origins of linguistic creativity. That's just not my field, to be frank. But I can say that this kind of has to be considered a thought experiment because, we cannot go back in time and erase religion off the map, and we cannot erase religion out of human culture and society today either. So we kind of have to just accept the premise a priori as possible and imagine what the consequences would be. So I don't know if it's I think that your question is still a legitimate question, though, is would that mean that it would crop right back up again? I mean, if we were to just erase it at the moment, would religion rebuild itself, even if everybody had no memory of it and was not in any way compelled to do so by their history or their culture? Would they still naturally, due to their creativity and curiosity, redevelop religion? And another interesting question, would it redevelop in anywhere near the form that we have it today?
Well, if I can suggest something, Noam Chomsky does or has done a lot of work in this field, namely in mind science. And one of the things that we find in linguistics is that I don't care what language that you're using, You can analyze all of the languages together and look at them in a composite and find that all of us are coming to the same meaning in a sense. In other words, we're just using different phonemes for some reason. And so Noam Chomsky is simply looking at this, why has that happened? And so when you look at, all of these different cultures, all of these different people, and language starting actually at a particular time in history, I'm not saying it's extremely punctiliar, but I'm simply suggesting that that people, not from external purposes, came up with this, but they came up with these things that is within themselves. And so the question would be, how could we have avoided the meaning that's attempting to be expressed through the idea of religion? Because I think that Christopher was really enunciating something that's worth talking about, because most people think that theology is a belief in God in a sense, or it's the study about God, and that's not true.
I think it's finding a black
historically speaking, because you can be a theist and not even believe in God, simply because historically speaking, lots of people were called theists, and they were simply called theists because they were very much philosophers. And so sometimes philosophy and theology was interchanged. And when you look through the years, you had various disciplines that were synonymous, and people didn't care because they knew that these were disciplines that wrestled with difficult
Dr.
ideas.
Jones,
Yes.
with all due respect on that point, though, you can also be a fag and not even be a cigarette. Words are used in completely different manners for other people, and it's or for different things, and sometimes that their origins and their usages are completely irrelevant to one another. In that, so to say that people have been called a theist because they were philosophers is not particularly relevant to
people
modern
throughout
day.
history identified as being a theist and never believed in God. And my point is, this is not someone else calling someone a theist and a person standing up and saying, don't call me that.
Well, we consider them now theists.
Well, I'm saying that what the modern is saying and what the ancients were saying is not one and the same, and we're talking about the development. We have to look at the evolution of how thought has come about.
But
so
there's
I
also,
think,
language flux. It means that what theist means to us today and sort of the cultural metacognition is not the same, obviously, to what it meant to those people using it in that way at that time.
But I also think, too, is that we're forgetting about half the population of the world. All right, out of
I'm American. I do that all the time.
Right, because there's over 6 billion people on the planet, and only 2 billion Christians and 1.5 billion Muslims. So you still have somewhere around 2.5 to 3 billion people that don't believe either concept. And and within those people you have Hindus, you have Buddhists, and these folks have a similar philosophical outlook as what the Native Americans used to have, to where they didn't necessarily have a God, but there were elements within nature, there were elements within humanity, and they looked at those things as being revered. I'm not going to be partial to my personal view, although I will be for just a few seconds. These are pantheistic views, to where where there isn't a being that's God, but there's there's
Sure.
an essence amongst all things that is. And I think that just by happenstance, we have Christianity here in the United States, and we have Judaism here in the United States. I think we all know well that if we were all having this discussion in Saudi Arabia, there would be no discussion at all. We would all be Muslims, and we would all
I'd have
believe
been
in Allah,
hanged
and
a
that's
long
it.
time ago.
Yeah, you would have been. Yeah, but no, you wouldn't have, because this would have been hammered into your head, and there would have been no other option of thinking freely. That's one of the benefits that we have over here in the West, and they have it in Europe too. But where we're not afraid to step outside of the box. Guys like Spinoza and Paine and Hume, these guys did this for us. You know, they took
Certainly.
these steps. They ended up, you know, getting hung or ostracized or whatever for it. But, you know, ultimately these guys did it. And I think that when we have these discussions, sometimes we think about we forget about the other half of the planet who just rolls their eyes at this type of concept, where the atheists have friends with them. But, you know, but at the same time, they do revere, you know, they hold probably more of a reverence for Mother Nature and Father Time and those type of concepts rather than Yahweh.
Well, I think that a lot of the Hindu people might disagree with your description of them as pantheistic. I don't know specifically that many practicing Hindus, but I do know that it certainly is a theistic, just happens to be more polytheistic than Christianity.
Yeah,
Whereas Buddhism takes on a bunch of different roles and often gets intermingled with different mysticisms, or even Christianity, Hinduism, or Islam. I think that, you know, restricting it to the Abrahamic religions is something that our very Western perspective does on occasion, or on too frequent an occasion to Americans and the people growing up in really anything in the west of the Ural Mountains.
Well, let me insert something, because I think that you cut me off in a sense a while ago. You know, if we're going to deal legitimately with what religion is and deal with it adequately, I don't think that it makes a lot of sense, that is, from an analytic standpoint, to say, let's just talk about what we think about it today. I think that we need to deal with the etymology. I think that we need to deal with the diachronics and the synchronics. And if we don't do so, we're not looking at, you know, the evolution of it. And so my question would be, is evolution important in this chat? And let's look at it diachronically, and we can see that diachronically speaking, that there were times in which some things were egalitaric, as I was stating, and we can dismiss it and say, well, you know, language flux that we have today, yada, yada, yada. But that's really dismissing the point without dealing with the points that we have throughout history.
Well, I think that we can dismiss a lot of the point, though, when we consider what we're talking about as far as a phenomenon or an object independent of the label assigned to it. And I apologize because I'm not as familiar with the linguistic terminology associated with this, but to say, I mean, I believe the term is indexicality of the word theism has changed. It means that we understand the word to point to completely different things now than we did before. So to look at what the word used to point to is tracking the wrong thing backwards. When we're talking about theism, using today's indexicality, we have to consider then that object, phenomenon, or practice historically throughout time, whatever it may have been called throughout that time. To follow the word back can take us onto all kinds of tangents.
Well, I think that what we would have to do legitimately is to compare apples to apples. I don't think that we can say, well, we have this indexical approach and that's it, because you have to actually set up a deictic center in order to deal with it adequately, and that hasn't been done in this discussion. And number two, if we are to look at it legitimately, we have to go back in time and look at things and compare apples to apples once again. And we're going to have to compare various disciplines and various beliefs and find those things that are similar, because you can't say that disciplines are not like Olympic circles. They have some things in common and other things not in common. And at one particular time in history, most of your disciplines were very much like the Olympic circles, and they had a lot to do with theology. And so how unfortunate that is, or fortunate that it is, it just is. And so in a sense, it's part of our evolutionary history. Would you agree with that?
I certainly agree that it's part of our evolutionary history, I mean, culturally and biologically speaking. But again, I mean, I think that we have to narrow the scope to keep it relevant to
But that's
the-
been done in
the
other
topic.
generations, Greg. People have been writing meta-language. You're not the first person who has ever wanted a determinate language. People have been doing that for centuries. You can go
No,
back
I'm not looking to make our language determinate from here out. I'm looking at our language as it currently exists to define, therefore, a categorical understanding of what we are talking about, and then to follow that backwards through time. Because if we go the opposite direction and we follow the language back through time, then that's why I said it's possible to be a fag and not just be a cigarette, because that word is used both as a slur and a very derogatory and demeaning reference, and as a term for a small tobacco product that are, as far as I'm aware, not in any way related to each other, and that's even in current usages. We could do the same thing with the phonemic word red. And say
I
that it's
agree,
both
but
a
let me
color
interrupt you
and a
before we
past
go
tense
too far.
meaning.
Let me interrupt you before you go too far, because if we are going to have a meaningful conversation about religion, and whether we need it or whether it needed to be at all, would it not be, if you're going to say that we need to start from here and go backwards, should we not develop an adequate meta-language so we can compare apples and apples and stay on the same page and have a determined language and start from that point and go backward?
I guess I didn't quite follow the question there. You're saying we should define
I'm simply
or create a meta language that can go backwards through time?
I'm simply saying that we need to find, we need to develop a meta language. In other words, a determinate language that we can get on the same page with now in order for us to be able to speak apples and apples now. And then we can start the journey of discovering things back into the past, if I'm following you. Or am I missing your
right.
point?
That is what that's why I worked with Bob and talked a bit earlier about operational definitions, is because if we don't pin down what it is we're talking about, I mean, language is referential, or at least this particular aspect of language, and we're not trying to talk about the fact that it is referential or these particular phonemes and what they have been referential to in the past.
But when you say that, only an externalist would make that argument, because the internalist and the nativist in the linguistic community would completely disagree with what you just suggested.
You're going to have to elaborate on that point a bit.
Whew, that's going to take a long time. I don't want to interrupt the show. You asked me to jump in, and I did, and I'm just trying to tease a little bit, just trying to stimulate. And I'd like to hear from the rest of you guys. Chris, you have some wonderful points.
Is Daryl, is your microphone? I saw that things seem to work a little smoother for you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear him.
We can hear Daryl.
I don't know what it is. I've just sat here long enough, I guess. Actually, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, I wanted to ask if anyone had seen a particular cartoon. It was about a wolf and a sheepdog. Does that bring back memories to
I
anyone?
know what one you're talking about.
You do?
I do.
It's Ralph and Fred, I think, and at the beginning, they've got their time cards, and they say good morning to each other, and then they punch in, and they go to work. That's one of the...
I know exactly what you're talking about now.
That's one of the best teaching tools I think I've ever seen. To me, when I think of religion, I see people do this all the time. It's like they clock out for a minute when a need arises, or when they are experiencing maybe some sort of affection for another person. It's like, okay, let's clock out just for a minute and let's be decent to one another. And, to me, when I think about that, I think, okay, well, let's try that more and more and see if we can just do away with all our religious ideas and relate to one another just as people. Just as people who actually can care about one another and exchange ideas without becoming hostile. So I'm all for trying a world without religion. I know we can't go back and say, well, and find out what it would be like if it hadn't been around all along. But I'm certainly one who would look forward to seeing what it would be like without it.
Well, I think we're going that way. I mean, but I don't think that, I think what religion will turn into philosophies, personal philosophies, and you're going to have philosophical debates, similar to, the folks that Socrates debated and thousands of years ago. We're going to go back to that mindset that they had back then to an extent. But I think that'll happen. I think you can still have these discussions. You can have philosophical discussions about what's right and what's wrong, what's moral and what's immoral, and not necessarily have to protrude into replacing science.
But even if we have a world without religion, it's going to be a reaction to the world that had religion. So it's always going to be like,
for a few generations.
oh no, forever. It'll always have been a reaction against the religion.
Maybe.
I mean, and I guess that's just the way that I'm looking at it, because it'll always have been the flip side of the coin, right? Just
back when God existed, we did it this way.
Yeah, well, just like contemporary psychology, it will always suffer from the fact that it reacted against Freudian psychiatry, right?
Right.
Like, the fact that cognitive psychology.
Did we lose him?
Exists right now as a
I didn't know if
reaction
it was
against
him or me.
psychoanalysis, and the fact that behavioral psychology exists as a reaction against. What's that? Am I not?
You were breaking up there.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us? Yes.
Okay. Am I?
Yes,
am I
You're
good?
smooth and clear at this
Yeah,
point.
I can hear you.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Carry on then, sir.
Was I robotic for a second there? I was just saying, in the same sense that the sciences of. Am I losing it now?
No.
Hello.
No, you're okay.
Okay. I was just saying, in the same sense that that psychology now is will always be in the shadows of the fact that it reacted against Freudian psychoanalysis. Any future endeavor, any future non-theistic world will always be a reaction against the theistic world that we exist in now. That's the way I'm looking at it.
And I think that you're right, but I don't think that it's an eternal perpetuity that's going to happen. There's going to be a few generations where we're going to see that, but eventually, I don't see that. I mean, that could just be me, being crazy, but
Well,
I think at some point it'll go away. I mean, it's similar like now, it's unheard of in Western culture to stone somebody for cutting their grass on Saturday. Where, of course, other parts of the world, they would do that. But, so, and I think that came with us evolving and maturing and putting religion in its place. And I think when religion no longer has a place, at least from a context of supporting, of controlling somebody's life or controlling a civilization in any way, I think when that goes, it would be different.
We should consider that there are examples of that happening, or at least beginning to happen around the world.
In Europe, you see it.
Yeah. Northern Europe is a great example. I mean, Scandinavia has huge amounts of secularism, and yes, there are still atheists there are still devout theists and fundamentalists that exist within this culture, but they've basically been marginalized, and the cultures have become essentially secular to the point where religion is not even a core structure anymore. It's lost its skeletal nature within that culture. So I think it's possible, to say the least, but we also do need to recognize that it has developed to that point over time, so an abrupt disappearance probably wouldn't manifest in quite the same way.
I need to
I don't
interrupt
see
now
it
because
abruptly going
we
away.
do only have 5 minutes left, but I want you guys to answer each this question, and then we will end the show. And the question is rather simple, and I think that all of us agree that, the harmful side of religion needs to end, and I think that Nelson was right in reading, taking care of people and that kind of thing. I think most people would embrace as good. So the question would be, what do you think that we can do these days to put the harmful side of what we call religion away and do this quickly? Let's start with Christopher.
What can we do to put the harmful effects of religion away?
Yeah.
Um,
How can we get rid of it?
Get rid of just the harmful effects. In the same way that you would get rid of the harmful effects of any dogma. I think the worst part of religion are the dogmatic parts of religion. So whatever the answer to get rid of dogma would apply to the worst parts of religion. And I don't have those answers.
Yeah. Greg.
This is a question that I'm curious about for a specific reason. Where I think it was Neil deGrasse Tyson who put it that I might be wrong about that though. It might have been Sam Harris or somebody else. If you were to eliminate, no, I remember it was Penn Jillette. Anyway, if you were to eliminate both science and religion from the planet today, just disappear and all record of them having ever existed from people's memories and all documentation, it's almost guaranteed that both would come into existence once again. However, science would eventually reach the state or an extremely similar state of knowing that it's in today, whereas religion is almost guaranteed to take on a completely different and unpredictable form. As a matter of fact, it would be one of the most sincere pieces of evidence that a particular religion was true if we were to simply stumble upon a tribe that had no way, or perhaps another planet that had no way of ever knowing about our religion, and yet it had an identical or very similar one to one that we have here on Earth. But I guess that was sort of a non-answer to your question, but that's what you get from me today.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Nelson.
I think that what we need to do is we need to remember what Thomas Jefferson said in putting that wedge of separation between church and state. I think when you can get religion out of politics and out of governing people and how people live their lives, I think that's the worst part of religion. And once we can do that, and it's simple. Anybody who professes that Christianity or God or anything like that is the way they, dictate policy should be eliminated from being qualified to run for office, But and I'm not trying, and I'm not the atheist here, But I think that once we can put that into perspective, and once we can actually enforce what they wanted 235 years ago, once we can do that, then I think that's when we can start seeing the harmful effects go away.
But don't you think that a person's worldview does determine their conduct?
Yeah, I think a person's worldview does determine their conduct, but once they start talking about, for example, I think one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever heard in a political speech was when George W. Bush said, I think God wants everyone to be free. So if he did, then everybody would be free, But that's not the case. You know what I mean? So I think when people exert that type of thing into their overall perspective of governance, then you have a problem. If it's a side note, hey, what religion are you, by the way? Not that it matters, but what religion are you? And you say, I'm a Pastafarian or I'm a Christian, whatever, it shouldn't matter. But when you start doing things like what the circus show that we had with the Republicans this last time around, with Rick Santorum and Rick Perry, thinking that it was necessary to inject religion into the debate, I think that is the dangerous part of it, and that needs to go away. You know, you can be a wonderful, amazing, moral person as a Christian, but you can also be a wonderful, moral, and amazing person if you're a Pastafarian.
I agree. I agree.
Yep.
Daryl.
I did want to add one last thing. I'm sorry, from what to wrap my point into the answering of your question, which is I've just lost my train of thought, was in saying that if you were to eliminate religion and science completely from everybody's minds and memories today, they would both certainly crop back up. But I think that the only practical way for us to eliminate the harm that comes from religion is to take that consideration into our parental roles and our cultural roles, and to remember that religions are taught, science is discovered. And that's what I meant to say by the way that these came around. If we were to simply make a decision to stop teaching children, it would have to be universal or even enforced strictly, but if children were protected from dogma then and only taught critical thinking, then it would very likely eliminate a lot, if not nearly all, of the harm that religion brings to the planet today.
Yeah. Daryl.
I think we need to do what we're doing here. I think we need to build good relationships. Let me give you an example. Let's just assume there was a list of commands, let's say just 10 for the sake of arguments. And I know, as a theist, I know there are these 10 commands that were put together that supposedly came from God. I don't necessarily agree with them or see the need for them. But if I were to try to build a relationship with, say, my wife based on a set of commands, I shall not do this, you shall not do that, and I shall do this, and so on and so forth, I think we would have a very cold, ineffective, possibly relationship that would come to an end at some point. But if, on the other hand, if we're able to set that aside and build a relationship based on our affection for one another, based on mutual respect and admiration for one another, I think we would have something that would last. As a matter of fact, we do. You know? And you know, just the fact that people can come together like this, lay everything on the table, discuss all the possibilities. I think if all the world did this, that we would have no need for religion.
I agree. Now, I want to make this statement before I end the show. My wife and I have been talking much about how things have really changed for the better ever since we really started emphasizing atheists and theists coming together. And I'd like to thank you guys for being on the Cult of Honesty tonight, because when I listened to you, Greg, over the, I don't know how many months you've been here at the New
We're coming
Covenant
up
Group.
on the 1 year anniversary here.
1 year, yeah.
August 12th
I mean,
is a year.
Yeah, you've done wonders. That is by opening up various doors of discussion, and it's bringing people together. And I remember the first time that I listened to Christopher, it was just awesome. Same thing is true with Nelson, and Daryl has done so much, and these discussions are very, very good, and they need to get passionate. They don't need to be just dry. And so sometimes I just try to stimulate a little bit, and if I aggravate you, forgive me, and let's move on. But it's been so wonderful to have you guys in the discussion tonight. Let's do it again soon, and we love you guys so much, and this has been the Cult of Honesty. Goodbye.
Hey, I have a quick question for those